Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by three Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for Coffee and Conversation. Paul Vogelzang is the host of the award-winning podcast, Not OldBetter. The show focuses on better aging, better conversation, better guests, better friends, relationships, joy, and passionate living. Not OldBetter features stories about finance, family, education, relationships, culture, science, life, literature, and many other subjects with great interviews with today's thought leaders. Today, Paul Vogelzang joins us after recording his 500th episode.
Well, greetings, everybody. Well, today we are honored to have what I consider an old friend. It's been a while since I've seen Paul, but talk about, communication and social media and podcasts. This guy, I'll tell you, he's a pro. You probably mentioned it in the introduction, but he said 500 episodes of his excellent podcast. Yeah. Not OldBetter show. How'd you come up with that name, and how did you decide to focus on that age group?
I am that age group, so it's just one of those things. It made sense to me, and I feel like I turned 63 in May, and I really have never felt better. Although I will tell you this, 5 years ago when you and I first really were kind of talking, just prior to that, Roger, I'd been laid off from a long-term job in the technology sector. So I certainly wasn't feeling much better at that point in time. But I just decided, I had to do something that was going to put me into a position of kind of getting better. I really was interviewing for lots and lots of jobs, not getting anywhere. And I found that there was a whole group of people that were kind of in that same place, almost that same age group. Technology was laying off a whole bunch of people at that time. Of course, these days, that's the case with isolation and the quarantine. And certainly my best to you, Roger, and your family during all of this time, and Danielle and Teresa, you guys. But for me, I really felt like I had to be, I had to be aggressive about this. If I were going to get better, if I were going to do something, if I were going to have a second act, as they say, I better reach out and start to develop myself, and develop that so that I could have a longer plan and certainly a longer runway to get myself to a place where I could have a second act that had some longevity to it. And so the name just kind of fell in place. I was feeling like I had to get better. And I wasn't old at that point. I didn't feel old at all. I exercised like crazy. And so I really feel, like this is kind of meant to be. This is what I want to do. And this is what I love doing. And so it's just kind of worked out.
Yeah. I just heard something as a phrase. Age is a chronological number, not a condition. And
yeah.
But your story is inspiring, and I think we should put the spotlight on it. That from adversity can come a change in direction, but usually it ends up, for many people, certainly those with the right attitude, into something that's better. I know it happened to me that way, and these two people here, we're dealing with Teresa and Danielle, and so it's so often you hear that, and in this older demographic, they've had more of a window to have adverse things happen to them, and are still surviving and are resilient. So I mean, that's an excellent story, and we're glad that it took you here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I'm so glad to be here too. As I say, I love what I do. I think 2020 has been hard on everybody, but I've been very, very fortunate and blessed. And so I feel like this is, I'm kind of just getting started.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, what have you learned? How do you bounce back from defeat during tough times, particularly with COVID on top of everything else?
Yeah, I really have leaned on my family. I have leaned on all of you. I read an awful lot. I really have tried to kind of take progressive steps every single day to make sure and stay on top of current events. I really I exercise every day. It's really almost a religion to me, but I am a very faith-based person just in kind of who I am. So my community around me, I think, has been my saving grace. I'm very lucky. Roger, you'll appreciate this too. And I've told you about this before. My mom is 90, going to be 91 in 2021. She reads Masterpiece Living. She reads the book that you signed for her. She reads that every single day. She reads a chapter of it. And so she's very much an inspiration to me. I think during these times, Danielle, it is challenging to try to stay connected with everybody. But thank goodness, we have Zoom. Thank goodness we can kind of stay in touch with each other. I can't tell you how many times, rather than just to pick up the phone and hear somebody's voice, I prefer to see somebody's face. So I know we're going to do this in an audio and a video kind of format, but gosh, it is so great to see all of you guys. I really enjoy seeing people. Roger and I met downtown DC a couple of years ago. That was a wonderful experience. And now to see you guys all again, it just means everything to me. And I think that's what we do need right now. I do think, this is not my phrase, but it's a wonderful one. It does take a village, and it takes one for me to kind of keep everything kind of going.
This pandemic has done something pretty important to all of us. We've been talking about things in the abstraction, how important it is to be socially connected, to be physically active, intellectually active, have meaning and purpose. But I think this COVID has acted like a lens, and it has focused on these things, how important those things are, as particularly the social connection. I mean, I think that's what we're, around the world experiencing. The Italians feel it more severely than we do because they're social people, but the social people, they're the ones I think who are really, they're getting creative, that's for sure. And we are creative beings.
Yeah. I enjoy that about what I do. And I think that creativity, in whatever form that we can practice it, I think it broadens us. And so I get a chance to be creative in talking to others. And that certainly for me is the stimulation that I need in order to really keep this going. I do think you're right, Roger. Isolation, not to be too dramatic, but it is a killer. And I think our age group, we need each other, particularly now. And so it's an interesting time. I will tell you all this. I have seen, and you guys probably have seen the same thing, that the numbers of my listenership has actually climbed. I tend to do more audio than video. My listenership numbers have actually climbed, and I think it's a direct relation to how we're spending our time. We want to connect with people, do it creatively.
No doubt.
Yeah.
So good. So Paul, about longevity, what is it that you want your audience to know and not only know, but practice, actually do, and even share with others?
Thanks, Teresa. I think that is the question for us all in this particular age group. I think as a community, we do need each other. Those things we've talked about, but I think everybody is going to need to do something that reflects themselves and how they feel best. For me, it is exercise. I can't stress it enough. And I am not an intense exerciser, any longer, but I love to do some stretching. I love to do a little cardio stuff. I love to get out on walks. I think those things are kind of fundamentals because I think it really gives us this chance to see the bigger world and not just be so narrowly focused on what it is that might be our problems. I think longevity is a science. Roger certainly has heralded that. I do believe, though, that longevity also is a state of mind, and I think that we need to practice it in a way that every single day we're doing something that makes a step forward. Not every day will we be able to make a step forward. It's almost the old saw, one step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. However that kind of falls together for people, I think we just need to think in terms of longevity and think, okay, how am I going to make today better? How am I going to make sure and have a little bit of interaction with my community? How am I going to get my brain spinning in a way that's going to allow me to think and be creative so that I can apply some things so that I do have this more engaged life? And that means, being available to our community and offering. I remember, Roger, you and I talked about this idea of offering service, and I love that idea because I think it's just important that we say to somebody else, I'm going to get a little outside of my head right now, and I'm going to do something for somebody else to help them in a situation, because it's not all about me. And I think there are always people out there that are going to have it not as good. And so I think we need to think in terms of helping others, and that offers longevity. And I believe that it's through those acts that we really can maintain and befriend others in times when they need it, and they'll be there for us. I really believe that it's that kind of, working together, that symbiotic relationship that feeds us, that allows us to live on and have a sustained life.
Well, you're doing it, Paul. Let me tell you. I will tell you, you're doing it. 500 episodes worth.
Thanks, Roger.
And on this, I alluded to it earlier, the eclectic group. I mean, you've had Deepak and Chelsea and Koki. We all know who that is. Anthony of the day is Anthony Fauci.
Mm-hmm.
That had to be interesting, particularly now. And I'm just so pleased that you've been able to attract these people, because I know they have a message. But here's a hard question, very hard. If you have 500 episodes, do you have a favorite, or at least a favorite topic, or a favorite person, and why? Why was that?
Yeah, so it is kind of a hard question, actually, and it almost is. It's almost a question that I tend to delineate almost on a year-by-year basis. When I first started, you'll appreciate this story, all of you guys. My number one goal was to interview the musician, the singer, kind of my era, of our era here, Judy Collins. That was going to be the be all, and I thought if I could interview Judy Collins, that would be it. And so during that first year, I reached out. I was a pest. I was, a nudge. I was everything I could possibly do to get her attention so that I could interview her. And ultimately, she joined the show. I talked to her for about an hour. That was awesome. And then the cool thing about that, and why that does remain very much a favorite for me, is because within 6 months, she released a new album, and her manager then called me. So it kind of was, it kind of was proving grounds a bit for me, because, I had been enough of a gracious, I'd been a pest, absolutely. But then I kind of turned the corner a little bit and became a bit more gracious, such that she wanted to come back on the show. So that was an honor and a pleasure. I've talked to some wonderful, wonderful guests, as you've mentioned, Dr. Fauci being among them. And I think probably that has been a pinnacle over the last year because of our needs. And he was just so candid. And he initially, when his staff reached out, he had about 15 minutes to give me. That was all. We ended up spending about 45 minutes together. And he talked about everything. He talked about his own family in relation to some of the things that were going on with regard to COVID and the precarious nature that his family felt they were in as a result of his activity. Something that he just was having a hard time putting his head around, and I had a hard time with myself. But he's really, I think, been an inspiration of hope during all of this. He offers such wonderful advice to our age group and our community. So certainly those individuals have been fantastic. But I also get a chance to talk to a whole bunch of other people that are equally creative and talented. They might not have that marquee name at that particular moment like Fauci, although they might have had that name over their past, or perhaps even currently in future. We might not know as much about them. But those people are just so fun for me to talk to as well, because then I get to learn something. And Teresa, you ask about this idea of longevity. I just love to learn. And so I like to I like to ask questions that I can learn something from, because I think if I'm learning something, my audience will learn something. So yeah, Roger, those have been some of the highlights for me, definitely.
I can understand why.
It should be noted that karma is in full force, because I stalked Paul Vogelzang on LinkedIn for several weeks to get him to come on our show. So thank you for being here. It all comes around.
Goes around, comes around. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a funny story. Not funny. You were more successful, but Judy Collins was big for me also. And I'm older than you, so we were almost contemporaries. We're close. But she must have a friend here on Cape Cod where I live. So every summer she's here, and she does these extremely intimate concerts, maybe 20 people. And so, I get to sit a few feet from her a couple times, and she is marvelous. But I was supposed to meet her after one of these. It was all arranged. And then she went ahead and got engaged, and she didn't show up for the concert. So I don't know, if I had any designs, they went away anyway.
As long as you know where you stand.
Yeah, hang in there, Roger.
So, Paul, I have a hard question for you, too. I think it would be a hard question. Of all the guests that you've had in more than 500 episodes, what stands out for you? Something that you've learned from one of your guests that really stands out?
Well, I think for me, and I mentioned this, I do love to learn. So I'm learning an awful lot about climate change, and that is my buzz, worthy issue. I think my age is such that, I've lived through a lot of, kind of social unrest, and I've lived through the witnessing of the power of social causes. And I think that is probably the social cause that I certainly am. I mean, there are many others that are wonderful causes and important ones, but this one to me is one that I really am learning. And I think for me, what I'm learning is that I'm a lifelong skier. I love to snow ski. And we're seeing, because of climate change, the reduction in snowfall worldwide. And so ski resorts are starting to close. And that's going to affect somebody like me. Now, that perhaps might be viewed as a frivolous impact, because oceans rising and storms and wildfires, all those are much, much bigger. But I think when it's brought home to you in such a way that personalizes it, boy, that really did. Now, my mother is 90 and lives in Northern California. She has been personally impacted by the wildfires there. And so this is a worldwide problem. This is an enormous issue. And I'm very fortunate, because I live just out, my wife and I live just outside of Washington, D.C. And so I get a chance to work with wonderful organizations, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit about Smithsonian, but one in particular that I do get a chance to work with is the National Science Foundation. And their entire orientation certainly is around making funding available to study this issue and many others, to the extent that there are additional facts gleaned about where we are with glacial melting, about where we are with all of these other subjects. So I think, Teresa, that's been one that's been most interesting to me, but one that I really I've needed to learn about, and I've needed to understand it better so that I can be so, and I think this is and I'll just say this one last point about that. I think generationally, it's important to come together on a lot of issues. And sometimes there are just purely generational issues. I don't think climate change is one of those. I think we all are fighting this. We are all needing more information about it. And so joining together with young people, Greta Thunberg, for example, who comes to mind, knowing who the activists are within that community, albeit, many of whom are, 40 years younger than I am, I think is an important step for us generationally, so that all of us can look at each other and say, we're in this together. It's not just something that boomers are shifting off to others to solve, and I think there certainly is that message out there in the media that the boomers are going to, be done with it and move on and leave that. And that's not how I feel. And I feel as though there are many, many just like me in my age group. And I'm sure Roger and all of us are feeling the same way about this subject, but I do think it's one of those cross-generational issues that we need to embrace. That's one that I've really tried to focus on because I want to learn more about it, but I think it's also one of the most important ones for me to know about.
And that's important that we have something that can bring us together, another problem we're having. And I think that is an issue that can. So I know your next guest on this, John Kerry, is coming, right?
Absolutely. Well, you're there on Cape Cod, so can you help me out there?
With the World Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, we have the climate experts there. And if I can, I will.
Yeah, awesome.
They're just all there. In fact, during the Obama administration, they were the key scientists, but the key scientists were cavemen over the last one. So, excuse me.
I'm with you, sir.
You can cut it out if you want.
Yeah, no.
I don't think we should.
Yeah, right. I don't think so.
So you mentioned it briefly. Can you tell us also a little bit more about the Smithsonian Associates Art of Living author series? What is that about?
So I love to read, and I just always have a book or two going. And the Smithsonian has a wonderful collection of authors that they work with, and within the Smithsonian is a great program called the Smithsonian Associates program, and they bring authors to speak in various settings within Washington, D.C. and all around the country, primarily focused in Washington, D.C., which is where my family lives. And now with COVID, we're all just so, just spread out around the world and so needing these kinds of connections that I've been asked by Smithsonian Associates to interview their various authors for kind of virtual events where the authors are giving me tours of their books. They're perhaps giving me tours of exhibits that they might have prepared. They're giving me tours virtually of work that they've done so that I can share that with not just my audience, but with the Smithsonian and Smithsonian Associates audience. So I get a chance to talk to just a whole bunch of different people. As a matter of fact, a name that you all might know, Dr. Rita Caldwell, who was the very first woman chair of the National Science Foundation, is an upcoming guest. And she's going to talk about a lab of one's own and this idea of gender and sexism in science, which I think is very much a real issue. And so I get it. And she's the author of many wonderful books on this particular subject. So I will talk to lots and lots of different authors because I just love to read, and I like to share books because I think it is a way for us to open our minds a little bit and understand what is going on. It's hard for authors to write today. Roger, you write so well, and you have such a wonderful way of getting these books into print, but not all authors are as successful. And so I feel like as I'm talking to authors, I'm trying to help them publicize their books too, not just learn. So I kind of have this two-pronged approach, and Smithsonian loves it because they bring all of these authors together to really do just about that same thing. And I'll tell you selfishly too, the publishers will usually share an advanced reading copy of the book, what they call an ARC, and I get to have a copy of the book for free in exchange for it.
It's a huge feather in your cap. It's well earned though, and wow, I'm jealous, but good for you. I'm really happy it's in the right hands. That's the most important thing, to get it out there.
Yeah, to get it out there. Yeah,
nicely done.
And he doesn't shy away from the tough topics. Ageism, sexism, environmental causes. Like, you take on some pretty tough topics.
Well, I do try to do that because I think it would be very easy for me to, I think talking to kind of my little network is not what I need to be about. I need to go 2 or 3 hops beyond that. I think one of the tougher topics that I've tackled recently, in addition to climate change, is the LGBT community within those who are over age 60 and 65. I've talked about this before, and I don't mean to be, to disgorge anything, but I have a gay son, and I love him tremendously, and I want him to age and enjoy that aging process and be, just exactly who he is. And so talking about this subject now to those who are in this particular category, I think will help him and others as they're aging. So yeah, I try to talk about a lot of different things because I feel like my audience is equally dispersed, and they're interested in these subjects. They might not know much about the subject, but they're kind of learning right along with me. And many of my audience know much, much more about it, and I get to hear from them every single show. I'll get a spate of emails saying, well, you should ask this or try this particular guest. And so I always try to listen to my audience about potential guests too that are might be interesting to them.
Well, we're so aligned, in fact, when we were looking for a name, what are some good names out there? So we were thinking of stealing yours, but no, we didn't.
Thank you for that.
How aligned can we be with the bright side of longevity? That's exactly what you're talking about, I believe. And, we know the bright doesn't mean always, rainbows and unicorns. It just means the potential and some things that we, as a society and with the ageism that's there, we don't really think about, but is there, the human capital and the potential. But what a message. And it's so much fun doing it, isn't it? And, it falls on very attentive ears and warm soil and all of that. So I just think you do great work, Paul.
Well, thank you, Roger. And it's so good to connect with you because, as I say, you inspire me, and I love having this connection with you and your team because it really, I think it does take us all to make sure and spread this. Our audience is so diverse; they need these kinds of touch points, and they need all of us doing it. And you've been a leader doing this for a good period of time and a good period more. So let's just hang in there together, and boy, keep it going.
Well said. Well said, ladies. Any more questions do you have for Paul? We can't throw a rope around him very often, so we've got him. Okay, all right. Well,
we could talk all day, Paul, but we'll release you.
We should ask for him to let us know. Not OldBetter. How can people listen to your show and find you?
Oh, thank you very much, Dania. Yeah. So really, it's just that name, Not OldBetter. The URL is actually Not Old-Better, but if you type in my name, Paul Vogelzang, if you type in Not OldBetter, if you go to all the same places where you can find Roger's great podcast, you'll find me too. All the podcasts that you guys do and do so well, I try to find myself in and amongst that area. So look for me there.
We will indeed, Paul. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, guys. Happy holidays to all of you.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.